Hello everyone, so welcome to my channel here. So I'm the lecturer, your personal lecturer. Okay, so since this is the very first chapter of our so-called lecture, okay, so I'm going to give you guys a little bit of introductions to what is actually means by object-oriented programming. Okay, so So before we dive into actually what is object-oriented programming, so we are going to look a little bit on what we are going to learn in this video. Okay, so the first one will be the introductions. Okay, introductions to what is actually object-oriented programming. Second one is the procedural versus object-oriented. Third one is the object data and also operations. So what does it mean by object data, or what does it mean by object operations? And then very last one, which is the three pillar of object oriented. Okay, so the without further ado, so let's go through with the lecture. So don't worry guys, so this is not going to be a very boring school call lecture. Okay, so we are going to mix up a little bit of practical codings, okay, so to enhance your understanding. Okay, so without further ado, so let's go through into our lecture. Okay, so before we go deep into our lecture slides, so first thing that we have to know what is actually an object. Okay, so an object represents an entity in the real world that can be distinctly identified. So what does it mean? Okay, so means any entity in the real world can be known as an object. Okay, so for example, what can be an object? Okay, a student can be an object, a desk can be an object, a circle can be an object, a button or even a loan can be viewed as an object. So we have four examples down here. So these are the example of objects. Okay, so in this word, what it means is that an object is anything that you can find in the real world. Okay, anything with a physical existence that you can find in the real world is known as the objects. Okay, an object consists of unique state and also behavior. Okay, so what does it mean by state and also behavior? So you can see in the bracket, state means data field. Okay, or in other words, we know it as the variable. Okay, and then we have behavior. What does it mean by behavior? Okay, we call it in object-oriented programming concept, we call it as methods. Okay, some of you guys may be from procedural programming background, we call it as a functions. Okay, so that is what we call as an object. Okay, so next one, some of you guys may be from procedural programming background, so let's give you guys a little bit insight on what is actually procedural versus object oriented programming. Okay, so procedural paradigm focus on designing methods. Okay, the object oriented paradigm couples data and methods together into objects. Okay, so if you're from procedural programming background, so you know that whenever you are writing a code, you will have a lot of functions. Okay, so in one particular file, so you will have a lot of functions into it. Because why? Because in procedural paradigm, we focus more on designing the functions rather than designing the data and also methods. Okay, whereas in object-oriented paradigms, we focus more on how we manage data and also methods into an objects. Okay, so we will have a clear separations of the data into different methods and also different data. Okay, so software design using object-oriented focus on objects and operations of the objects. Okay, means each and every objects will have their own data and also operations. Okay, so operations means functions. Okay, so you have to know the terms. So methods means functions, operations also means functions. Okay, all right, so object data. So what is actually object data? Okay, sometimes we call it attribute or also fields. Okay, so object data is actually the state of an object, okay, which is also known as attributes, data fields, variables, okay. So it's represented by data field with their current values, okay, such as student name. So normally in student name, we will put it as stud name in our variable, okay. Number of book, date borrow, okay, book name, and also book status. So these are actually the object data, okay. So object operations. So what is actually object operations? Okay, like what we mentioned just now, so object operation is also known as a method. Okay, remember students? So method actually means functions. Okay, so why do we even use functions, or why do we even use methods? Okay, because method is invoked on objects to perform a specific actions. Okay, so like for example in your functions, okay, so normally we'll write functions to, to call specific actions, to perform a specific actions. In this case, let's say for example to check the availabilities of a book, so we'll write a function, change the status of a book, okay, and also check the number of books available. Okay, so these are actually known as methods. Okay, okay, so much talking here, so much theory here. Perhaps you guys will be a little bit blur on, wait, what is actually operations? What is actually, how do we even write methods, or how do we even write data fields? Okay, so for your information, we are going to use Java programming in this case, okay, in our lectures, to show you on what is actually the object-oriented programming. So we'll be using Java to illustrate on object-oriented programming. So too much talking here, so let's have a little bit of coding and introductions. Okay, so the software that we will be using is actually known as NetBeans. So you can download any versions of your NetBeans. Okay, you can have JDK, latest version of JDK also doesn't matter. Okay, so without further ado, so let's start on how we actually do the coding. Okay, okay, so we will go ahead and actually create a project. Okay, so to create a project in NetBeans is pretty simple. Okay, so what you need to do is very simple. You see the icons here, just click on the icon, and then we'll be using Java End for this project. Okay, so just click on Java End and then open the Java applications. Okay, so name your application. So we'll be using a demo one as our examples. So depends on whether you want to create a main class or not. Okay, so in this case we will create a class ourselves. Okay, so for easier for me to introduce you guys what is class and what is actually objects. Okay, so just click on finish. Okay, so the NetBeans here will create you a project. So in this case, okay, so in object-oriented programming, so we are going to create a Java class. Okay, so create a Java class. So perhaps we name our Java class as a circle. Okay, so very easy. So so sorry here. So let me zoom out the text a little bit so it will be easier for you guys to see. Okay, so I think this is better. Okay, so in Java programming, okay, the class, we will be creating class or objects for our program. Okay, so it's quite different with what we did in procedural programming. Okay, because procedural programming, we have one files that we have all the functions inside, but it is slightly different in object-oriented programming. Okay, so let's say for example we are creating an object called, or a class called circle. Okay, so what does it mean by data field? Okay, so it's pretty simple with procedural programming. So the way that we want to create a variable or data field is very easy. So what we do is, the first one is our data type. Okay, and then our variable name equals to, let's say, the value that we're going to put in maybe is 3. Okay, 3.0. Okay, this is what we known as a variable, or what we call as a data field. Okay, so students, so you have to remember the terms when we say data field or when we say variable, it actually means the same thing. Okay, so what is operations? Okay, so we talk about data field, so the next thing we're going to talk about is what is actually a methods. Okay, so the methods here in object-oriented programming, it's slightly different with procedural programming. Okay, in procedural programming, we clamp everything inside one folder, okay, or one file, sorry. Okay, but in object-oriented programming, it's slightly different. Okay, so every methods and every data field is related to the objects. Okay, so let's say we're about to create a method that is related to a circle. Okay, so let's say the method is called as let's say calculate radius. Okay, so this is actually the methods that we create. Okay, so students, so maybe we haven't gone through in detail what is actually this. Okay, what is all this? Okay, so just bear in mind. Okay, so this is the data type, this is the variable name, and then this is the value. Okay, but as for functions, this is what we call as the access modifier. Okay, so we are going to go through in depth of what is actually access modifier later on. Okay, okay, so we have created, oh sorry, I think this is calculate, let's say calculate area. Okay, so area of a circle. Okay, so this is what we call as access modifier. Okay, so we will learn about access modifier later on in our lectures, in the following lecture. Okay, so just bear with me first with this access modifier. So basically the access modifier means how we allow the methods or data to be accessed by others. Okay, and then this is the return field, and then this is the method name. Okay, so for calculating the area of a circle, so maybe we use this formula. Okay, so pi r square. Okay, so pi is around 3.141592 if I'm not mistaken, multiply with radius and multiply with radius. So this is what we call as a method. Okay, so it's equivalent to the term functions in procedural programming. Okay, so there you go. So this will be your class. Okay, so this is how we do programming coding, okay, in Java. Okay, all right, so let's go back to our notes. Okay, so we have seen on what is actually object data, and then we have also seen on what is actually object operations, which is method or actions. Okay, so object-oriented example. Okay, let's say you are about to write a program that automates the library book rental. Okay, for customer to rent a book. Okay, what are the two main objects in these problems? Okay, so the main objects will be books, students, okay, or perhaps you even have staff or whatsoever. Okay, so these are the main objects that exist, that has a physical existence in the actual reality. Okay, so that is why we call it object oriented programming. Okay, all right, so remember that we talked about the three pillars of object oriented programming. So in object oriented programming, we have three basic principles that you guys have to remember. Okay, so the first one will be encapsulations. Second one is inheritance. Third one is what we call as a polymorphism. Okay, so maybe let me show you guys a bit on a picture. Okay, so this is what it means by encapsulations. Okay, so imagine these capsules here is actually your class. Okay, and your class is protecting the data field and also the methods inside. So like what we what we know about a capsule, so the capsule is hiding all the medicines inside the capsule itself. Okay, so the same thing is happening in encapsulation. So our class is covering all our data field and also methods within itself. Okay, so means covering up. Okay, I'm so shy, I have to cover up everything, so I don't let anyone else to access to my data fields. Okay, I don't let anyone to tamper with my data fields. Okay, so that is the purpose of encapsulations. Okay, so encapsulation is all about wrapping variables and also methods in one single unit with the sole purpose of data hiding from external class, which means that the purpose that we are doing encapsulation is because we want to hide the data. We don't want to let anyone else to access to the data easily. Okay, so that is the main purpose of encapsulations. Second one is inheritance. Okay, literally what it means, inheritance means that you are giving something to your children. Okay, your children inherit some characteristics from you, from the parents. Okay, so inheritance is the ability to create a new class from the existing class. Okay, means that we are inheriting some sort of features from our parents. Okay, let's say for example in our real life, so we are inheriting the features or characteristics from our parents. So maybe the shape of our eyes, shape of our mouth. Okay, so these are all the DNAs that we inherit, or characteristic that we inherit from our parents. Okay, same thing here. Okay, so inheritance is the ability to create a new class from existing, means that you inherit some sort of what we call as the data fields, or it can be methods. Okay, so all of these are what we call as inheritance. So you are passing down to your successor. Okay, so inheritance enable you to define a general class. Okay, is what we call as a superclass, and later expand into more specialized class, which is what we call as a subclass. So we are going to talk in detail what is all these principles. So for now, students, so what you're going to do is just have a little bit concept image on what is actually inheritance. Okay, so inheritance is passing down a house to your children, so you inherit them. Okay, last one, which is what we call as a polymorphism. Okay, so the polymorphism is actually the ability to use the same expressions to denote different operations. What does it mean? Okay, so let's have a look at this picture. Okay, so when we talk about speak, okay, humans, dog, or cats, we have a different way of communicating. Okay, let's say in human we use different language. We use Chinese, we use Malays, okay, we use English, okay, or we use some other language, okay, to communicate with one another. But communicating can be something that is very general. Okay, when I told a dog, hey, communicate, you communicate with another dog, it might be different from human. Okay, but it is still communicating. Okay, so that is what we mean as the ability to use the same expression to denote different operations. Okay, speaking can be the same denotes, or the same what we call expressions. Okay, but speak is different in different animals. Okay, dog have their own way of speaking, dog have their own way of speaking, and cats have their own way of speaking. So each of them, they are having different operations, or what we call as a different implementations. Although speak is very general, but in precise we can have different operations, although we are sharing the same definitions. Okay, so this is what we means by a polymorphism. Okay, so students, don't worry. Okay, so this will be only the basic. Okay, later on in our video, okay, we are going to go into hands-on on how we are actually doing the coding. Okay, so this is just a very basic introductions to your object-oriented programming. Okay, so that's all for our lecture. So it will be a very short one. Okay, so thank you guys for joining. Okay, thank you guys for your time, and I'll see you again on the next video. Okay, so the next video is most likely going to be a hands-on practical on how we are actually doing with a coding. Okay, and remember, the coding is actually in Java. Okay, so perhaps we'll start with the basics first. Okay, and then we will go into the object-oriented concept. Okay, so once again, thank you everyone, and I'll see you in the next video. All right, so bye bye.